And social justice advocate Steve Donofrio joins us to discuss President Trump's signing of the executive order on police reforms about weeks of protest about racial injustice. Good to have you join us, Steve Donofrio. Now, what do you make of this executive order and the police reforms coming from President Trump?
Well, thank you for having me. I think the executive order is a small but good first step, but it simply is not going to be enough to address a much deeper problem.
What does this mean? How significant is this for the Black Lives Matter? We've seen weeks of protest, rather days of protest coming from that movement. So how significant is this?
Again, I think it is a very significant initial first step, but it's almost as if you want to put a Band-Aid or a bandage on a cancer. The problem has to go beyond throwing. We can't fix a deeper problem with a few quick fixes. But it's a good first step. It shows that people are listening and people are caring. And now it's going to be up to communities to collectively work together to solve these issues.
So we've also seen some level of reforms coming from the Minneapolis Police Department. They are defunding and dismantling. We've also seen the New York Police Department, with some radical reforms. When you put that side by side with the steps taken by the president, which way do you think that America should go in terms of police reforms?
Well, I think the idea, and a lot of times I think the ideas of defunding are misinterpreted. No one wants to get rid of the police department, but what we want to do, and I think what people want to do, is make sure that the police are functioning in their capacity as peacemakers. They're peace officers, but along the line, they've lost the idea of creating peace. And I believe that as Minneapolis and New York and other big cities look at police reform, they look at these things, they're going to be shifting funds to better uplift communities and better help and serve communities, along with retraining and then repositioning the police department within the community.
So I want to ask you about some of the statements or some of the issues in that executive order. Number one, the president said chokeholds will be banned except if an officer's life is at risk. Do you think that that statement is ambiguous and that it leaves grounds for misinterpretation, especially when you look at the fact that when is an officer's life at risk? What does that even mean?
Yeah, I think that's a very ambiguous statement, and it almost comes to the same problem we have now, is the interpretation of saying, a lot of times in the police training, people are taught to say, my life was at risk, therefore I use this amount of force. It's very up to the individual officer to decide how they feel at that very moment, if they feel their life was at risk or not. And so I'm not sure how far that's going to go.
So one's life being at risk is subjective. So should there be an outright ban on chokeholds, irrespective of whether the officer's life is at risk?
I will leave that to the experts, but I believe that a chokehold, the chokeholds as we know them, there are two different types. You're talking about a chokehold that cuts off wind versus a chokehold that cuts off the blood flow to the brain, just like used maybe in MMA or some type of martial arts. They're different types of chokeholds, and they do different things. And to apply them does take a level of expertise. And oftentimes, officers don't have the time or the training to develop the expertise to apply that correctly. So it might not be a bad idea to say, you know what, these chokeholds aren't going to be effective because of the lack of training. Either one, let's train them better, or two, let's get rid of them completely.
So the president is also looking to create a national database of officers with abuse history. How does this work? And the idea that this could help in eradicating abuses by officers, how does that work?
I think the idea and the concept is about being more transparent. A lot of times for the police departments, they have been a fraternity, so to speak, a society, and they keep a lot of things internally and aren't transparent on where use of force has been, who's been doing it, what's been happening. there's been a society, or you might say kind of a social group within the police department of, we take care of our own, and it stays in the house. And so now this concept of, let's get a database, let's open this, let's be more transparent, is a wonderful thing. It's what we need, because there are so many great police officers that a few of them that go bad tarnish everyone's reputation.
But like you just said, the idea that people protect their own within the police department, do you see police officers coming forward to say, oh, I know this person and I think this person have an abuse history, so what I am reporting this person? Because, for example, Derek Chauvin had about 18 complaints filed against him before the killing of George Floyd.
I think that problem has been in the police for generations. The idea and the concept is great, and I think the newer police officers, some of the younger police officers, are much more open, and they want that era of transparency. But I do believe it will take time for them to feel 100% comfortable. It will take leaders like here in Minneapolis, the chief of police, to push that. They have to feel comfortable that the leadership will back them up, but more importantly, that their brothers in blue, so to speak, won't let them out. Because one of the fears is, if I turn somebody in, or if I say something against a fellow officer, when my life's at risk, will I get backup? Will they come and help me in time of emergency? That's always been the greatest fear. If I report a fellow officer, but now I need help, will any help come to me, or will they leave me on my own? That's the culture, and that's what has to be slowly changed. It won't happen overnight.
All right, Steve, you are a social justice advocate. Help us understand, beyond police reforms, what will social justice mean, or what would justice mean for minorities in America? What is justice in a broader term?
And justice, I think, too, is a term that, how do we define it? I see oftentimes these, no justice, no peace. But if we want justice, we must be people who are just. And trusting the police is a two-way street. The police must trust our communities. We must build unity, not division, and we must do it by having some conversations. And the most important thing here is taking personal responsibility. It's communities coming together and reshaping and coming up with a whole new paradigm of how we build and grow.
So there will be a bill before Congress next week on police reforms as well. What do you hope to see and hear coming out from that plenary by Congress?
Well, I hope that it's passed, and I hope it's passed across bipartisan lines. We can't have this be a 50-50 thing, because that doesn't solve any real problems. We can't keep having one group try to overpower another group. We must come together to solve these problems. If we continue to have one group fight against another group, it will never change, because as power changes, votes change. We still have a power struggle. When we end these power struggles and come together to solve real problems, that's when things will begin to really develop and really change. And I like to say, it's not about more protesters and protests, it's about finding some problem solvers and getting to work.
Social justice advocate Steve D'Onofrio, many thanks for sharing your perspective with us.